It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at the players of Costa Rica. Here we go! Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 28 on the groups and players of the 2024 Copa America. This episode covers Costa Rica's players. In fact, it is part 2 of the Player Media Cast, and here we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that, part 1, in the show notes. This episode, part 2, will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we'll take a quick look at their preliminary squad and their warm-up games. In section 2, that's the main part of this media cast, we look over the list that we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And then in section 3, we summarize the selections. We summarize the surprises in the selections and review injuries. Let's begin then, and we begin with the preliminary squad. And actually, like a lot of teams, there was none for Costa Rica. They just put out a 26-man final squad published on June 11th there, and there were no cuts to be made because all 26 players are there, so none cut and no late replacements. We did see that for some teams, but for Costa Rica, none. The other thing we'll look at is their warm-up games. So they had 3 games prior to the Cup. The first one was a friendly on May 31st in Costa Rica. That was against Uruguay. We're not particularly interested in the results, more in the lineups, but we might as well say the result. That was a pretty good result. It was a 0-0 draw with Uruguay, so defense held out against a good team there. And then they had 2 World Cup qualifiers against pretty easy opposition. The first on June 5th in Costa Rica against St. Kitts and Nevis. That was a 4-0 win. And on June 8th, against Grenada away, a 3-0 win. So World Cup qualifying off to a good start for Costa Rica there. And as I say, we're more interested in the lineups. We saw in part 1 that the new manager favors a 3-man back line, and that is what we see in all 3 warm-up games. So a 3-4-2-1 in the first game against Uruguay, and then a 3-2-2-2-1 in both of the games, the World Cup warm-up games there. So we'll refer to these warm-up games as we go through. We did make some predictions at the end of part 1. Very tentative, though, because things seem very up in the air. But certainly the selections we see in the warm-up games bring form to what we saw in part 1. So a lot of the veterans gone. Really, actually, most of the surprises were in part 1, so not many surprises here. But let's go to section 2 and begin with that. So manager Alfaro Gustavo, just their manager since November, so he only had a few games in November, February and March to get his team together, but actually he did most of the heavy lifting in those games because we see some consistency between there and the warm-up game. So Alfaro Gustavo, we will consider him to have been selected in that he wasn't fired before the tournament. On to goalkeepers, we had 2 likely candidates in Kevin Chamorro and in Patrick Siqueira. Both of those were selected for the squad. We had a possible candidate, Alexandre Lezcano. He was not selected for the squad. It was one of our 2 possible but unlikely candidates. Joseph Galdado was the first one. He wasn't selected, but Aaron Cruz was selected, making his first tournament after five tries. finally makes it to a tournament, Aaron Cruz. And that's what we have here. Of course, Keylor Navas announcing his retirement from the national team in May 23rd, 2024. We knew that in part 1. So there are 3 goalkeepers. Let's look at the warm-up games. We had predicted Kevin Chamorro, not with great confidence, but as the likely starter. But here, it not going with what we thought. It's Patrick Sekira starting all 3 matches there. So definitely looking like the starter here. All right, on to central defense. We had a definite candidate in Francisco Calvo, really one of the only veterans left on the squad. He was selected for the squad. He's in fact the captain of the team now. We had 2 likely candidates, Julio Cascante, who was selected, and Juan Pablo Vargas also selected. 3 possible candidates here. The first one, Pablo Airboyne, not selected, but the second one, Fernand Ferran, was selected. The third one, Alexis Gamboa, not selected for the final squad. We do have 3 of our 4 possible but unlikely candidates selected. So going heavy on defense here. The first one, Giancarlo Gonzalez, the most experienced of them, not selected. So really get the feeling that the manager is building youth here. The second of the 4, Douglas Sequeira, was selected. So was Jason Molina and also Jalen Mitchell. We had said in part 1, we thought Jalen Mitchell might have a slightly better chance because of his club affiliation, playing for Feyenoord in the Netherlands. So he was selected. So that's more than usual, 7 central defenders. Let's go to the warm-up games and see what we see. Well, maybe not unusual if they are using a 3-man backline. We see Calvo starting all 3 games there as the left defender of the 3-man central defense. Mitchell starting all 3 games as the right. So both of those look like starters here, Calvo and Mitchell. I think we had tentatively said Calvo and Cascante as 2 of the central pairing, and we didn't know the other one. However, it was Molina in the first game and then Cascante in the next 2 games. So we can't be sure, but it does look like Cascante in the center, Calvo on the left, and Mitchell on the right as the starting lineup there. Okay, over to the left back position. And we had no definite or likely candidates here, just the possible candidate, Joseph Mora, and he was selected for the final squad. And possible but unlikely candidates, we had 3 of them, but none of them selected, including veterans Brian Oviedo and Ronald Matarrita. So again, a kind of a turn away from the veterans. Matarrita only 29 years old, but we do see some of the more experienced players in their 20s also not being selected. And what had we? Yes, we hadn't nominated a candidate here. It was too unclear. In the warm-up games, it's now a right wing position. So in the 3-man central defense, the position pushes up to be a winger, and it's Mora in game 1. And a more attacking player, Lassiter, who will meet soon in games 2 and 3. So it looks like the Lassiter, I believe he's coded as a left midfielder, looks like the likely starter there in a left wing role. Moving over to the right back, we had 2 likely candidates. The first one, Haxel Quiros, and he was selected for the squad, but we get our first surprise non-selection here in Jeffrey Valverde. Ironically, in part 1, we had considered him one of the more kind of consistently selected players. He had started 4 of their 6 games and He had been injured for the last 2 matches, but had recovered, yet he wasn't chosen, Jeffrey Valverde. Instead, the possible candidate, Gerald Taylor, selected for the squad. And none of the candidates below that in the possible but unlikely or seemingly off the squad selected. So the starter, Jeffrey Valverde, not selected. Let's look and see who is starting the games. It was Queiroz in games 1 and 2, and Taylor in game 3. So I guess, well, I'm looking at game 3 as kind of close to the starting lineup. So with this information, I would call that an even bet on whether Haxo Queiroz or Gerald Taylor is the starter there. Okay, we go to the midfield and look at defensive midfielders. We had a likely candidate in Alejandro Brand, who was selected for the squad. A possible candidate in Orlando Gallo, although I think from the way we talked in part 1, we considered him more than possible because we had nominated him as a possible starter. Anyway, Orlando Gallo was selected, and so was the other possible candidate, Jefferson Brenes. Those are the only 3 among the defensive midfielders. Among the central midfielders, we had a likely candidate in Brandon Aguilera. And that is all that was chosen from here. The next level was a possible but unlikely candidate, and no one from that level or below was chosen. So just 4 central/defensive midfielders. And we saw in part 1 that this is usually a 2-man position, and so it is in all of the formations of the warm-up games. We begin with Aguilera and Gallo as the pairing against Uruguay in the first warm-up game, and then it's Gallo and Brenes selected, and in the last game, Gallo and Aguilera. So I think we had nominated Alejandro Brand and Gallo as the most likely starting pair. So we seem to have been wrong there. Gallo, we were right on, but it does look like Brandon Aguilera looking more likely to be the starter now. But we'll have to see when we get to the cup. Okay, that is the central midfield. Left midfield and right midfield, they don't really use the position that much, but we did have a couple of candidates. And here is where we see Ariel Lassiter. So instead of using a left back for that position when it pushes up to a left winger, they actually use a left midfielder, Ariel Lassiter. He was selected for the squad. He was a possible candidate for us here. The other possible candidate was Randall Leal, and had been the only injury risk there, and he was not selected for the squad. He had only been a possible candidate, though, so we're not sure if his non-selection was due to the injury or whether he would have not been selected even if he had no injury. Anyway, Randall Leal not selected for the squad. And for right midfielders, we only had 1 candidate at the seemingly off the squad level. I actually see that I had forgotten to put it on, but I remember mentioning it. It was Suhanda Zuniga at the seemingly off the squad. Wasn't selected. So among the left and right midfielders, Ariel Lassiter, the only one chosen. Up to the attacking midfielders, and on the left attacker position, we had a likely candidate in Alvaro Zamora. He was selected for the squad. And the possible candidate, Jewison Bennett, again, one of a few players, a kind of a class of players who looked promising 1 or 2 years ago, who now look like they're off the squad. Jewison Bennett not selected there, and nor were the candidates below that. So just Alvaro Zamora, one player over here. Let's see what they did in the warm-up games. It was Zamora starting as a left attacking midfielder in the first game and the second game. In the third game, it was Ugalde and Zamora kind of switching positions there. Ugalde playing as the left attacking midfielder instead of the forward that he is coded as, and we will see him playing as a forward. So we could consider that more of a position switch, and looks like Zamora has a firm grip on the position here. Right attackers, we had a likely candidate in veteran Joel Campbell, so really the only other veteran surviving into this tournament. He was selected for the squad. We had a possible candidate in Josimar Alcocer. I thought he was a bit more than possible. But no, definitely a possible candidate. He hadn't started that much under the new manager until coming in for the last game. So there, Josimar Alcocer selected. Those are the two players on the right attacking position. And when we look at the warm-up games, we see it is Alcocer in two of the games, the first and the third game, and forward Madrigal, who we'll meet right away here, playing as the right attacking midfielder in the second game. We did see actually Madrigal starting as a right attacker in one of the games in the lead up to the tournament as well, so not a surprise there. Central attackers, they don't use the position much. We only had the one candidate, Elias Aguiar, there, but he was not selected, but that might be due to an injury as well. He came into the May friendly with a muscle tear, although he seemed to play to the end of the season with his club. We think perhaps he was injured in the last game on May 12th because he subbed out for his club at halftime in that game, something he didn't usually do. However, now he is on the injury list with an unknown return date. Because he was at the possible level, we're not sure if the injury was the main reason. In other words, that he would have been chosen except for that. But we only had him as a possible candidate, so it may be that he wouldn't have been selected even if healthy. Anyway, Elias Aguiar not selected for the squad, and we move on to the forwards. And we had three likely candidates here. The first of them, Manfred Ugalde, we've mentioned, and he was selected. Next, we have Anthony Contreras, also selected, and Kenneth Vargas, selected as well. So all three likely candidates. Also, our possible candidate, Warren Madrigal, selected. So they're investing a lot in the forwards here. A lot of their slots going to forwards, because we also have a new candidate, really the only one who wasn't on our list in part one, and that is forward Andy Rojas. So I'll introduce him because he wasn't introduced in part one. Actually very young, just 17 years old. Sorry, 19 years old, and no caps for the national team. He plays for Herediano in Costa Rica. So made his first appearance there in May in the first of the warm-up games. He didn't start any of the warm-up games, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for two, Andy Rojas. And okay, let's move on to the section 3. That is our look at the players and the selections. And in section 3, not as many surprises as we expected here. Hang on, I didn't cover the forwards in the warm-up game, so I'll just go back and do that. In the first game, it is Contreras. And in the second game, Ugalde. In the third game, we might say it's kind of Ugalde because he switched positions with Zamora. So Zamora playing as the forward and Ugalde as the left attacker. But we're going to be interpret that to be a switch and act as if Ugalde started two games. We think he will be the starter going into the cup now. Okay, and we did have him as the likely starter before. Let's move on to section 3 and look at the surprises. So really only one notable non-selection there, and it is Jeffrey Valverde. the left. He's coded as a left midfielder, but was playing as a right back for most of the period. We were fairly confident that he would be selected. So a bit of a surprise there. Otherwise, I mean, we expected a lot more of this. Surprise non-selections, but he's the only one. We look at surprise inclusions. I forgot to give a little biographical information on them, because for the possible but unlikely candidates like goalkeeper Aaron Cruz here, we didn't go into much detail on their career because we thought they were unlikely. So let's take a look at him and the three other players. Aaron Cruz is 33 years old, no caps for the national team, but he has been around for quite a while. He plays for Saprissa in Costa Rica since 2017, and his whole career has been in Costa Rica. Kind of first appeared when named to the preliminary squad for the 2017 Gold Cup, but didn't make the cut there, and hasn't made the cut, whether selected for the preliminary squad like in the 2021 Gold Cup, or simply not selected for the other tournaments, has not been part of any squad there, including both World Cups. In the recent period, he had returned after a 17-month absence. He appeared as a substitute in one of their remaining 3 games after February 2024. That's where he reappeared in a kind of experimental or recruitment friendly in February 2024. And he was injured for the last 2 matches, so we don't blame ourselves for thinking that he was an unlikely candidate. But here he is, Aaron Cruz, finally getting onto a squad. I'm happy for him. Next, we have just the 3 central defenders as the only other surprise inclusions. So all of them were at the possible but unlikely level, and they were 3 selected. So Douglas Sequeira, Jason Molina, and Jalen Mitchell. We'll take a quick look at them too. Douglas Sequeira was 21 years old with no caps for the national team. He plays for Saprissa in Costa Rica since 2020, and he got his first appearance also in that recruitment friendly. In fact, all of these players did, except for Cruz, who kind of reappeared there. Sequeira got his first start there. And after that, for the he was on the bench for 1 game and not selected for the 2 March games. So again, no surprise that he was possible but unlikely. But here he is, Douglas Sequeira, making the squad. Next, Jason Molina, exactly the same story. No caps for the national team. He's quite a bit older though. He's 28 years old, and he plays for Guanacasteca in Uruguay. What am I talking about? In Costa Rica. Again, on the bench for the recruitment friendly, and not selected for the 2 March matches, so we had no idea that he would be selected. Jalen Mitchell, though, I do remember saying his club affiliation with Feyenoord in the Netherlands since 2024 might give him an edge, and it seems to have done. He was with Alajuelense in Costa Rica before that, and a few clubs in Costa Rica, even though he's just 20 years old. And he has 1 cap. Again, came on as a substitute in that recruitment friendly in February 2024. Not selected for the 2 March matches. So all of these a surprise. Okay, that's the surprise inclusions then. New players, Andy Rojas, we did introduce during the section 2 there. So he's the only new player, forward Andy Rojas. Let's move on to an update on injuries. So we did know about Randall Leal as an injury concern. in part one of the mediacast. I'll retell the story because it's really quite sad and interesting. He was out with a tendon tear from February to early April of 2024. That caused him to miss the March 2024 games. He came back to play for 5 minutes for his club on April 21st, and then was out with a hip injury since and an unknown return date. So I hope he recovers. I do remember liking him in the 2019 Gold Cup. That's the only tournament he's actually reached. Again, we're not sure if the injury was the reason, because he was just a possible candidate, so may not have been selected even if he was fit. The other one we didn't know about in part one, but it's the same situation. He was at the possible level, and we don't know if the injury is the reason. Elias Aguiar, an attacking midfielder, was not chosen, and I covered his muscle tear problem there in the section 2 of the podcast, so I won't repeat it. Instead, we will move on because we're finished. So no big injury problems for Costa Rica, but some big changes for Costa Rica compared to the veteran squad they had been perhaps over-relying on over the years. We see a full switch to rejuvenate the squad. So we're looking to see a fairly young squad at the tournament. It'll be interesting to see how they do. And that brings us to the end of this that brings us to the end. We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.